A little girl pointed a gun and shattered a fragile peace. After a brutal massacre, a shocking secret forces her to confront the only family she's ever known. One question will ignite a war and reveal a truth more dangerous than any weapon. If you're new here, subscribe and comment your location. Now let's begin. The metal was cold and impossibly heavy in Maya's hand, a stark contrast to the burning fury that choked her. The scent of gasoline, gunpowder, and something coppery, something final, clung to the inside of her nose. She stood in the doorway of the ruined clubhouse, her boots crunching on broken glass and splintered wood. Before her, the remnants of her life, her family, were huddled around a makeshift med station, the grizzled, bleeding men of the Steel Jokers. "Which one of you is going to tell me the truth?" Her voice wasn't a shout. It was a raw, fractured thing that cut through the low groans and muttered curses. Every head snapped up, eyes wide with shock, then confusion, then a dawning, cold understanding. They saw the girl they'd raised, Maya, their little bird, with wild, tear-streaked cheeks and a father's old .45 aimed with a terrifying steadiness at the heart of their circle. "Maya, sweetheart, put the gun down," rumbled Uncle David, his voice a gravelly bass she'd fallen asleep to 1,000 times, now strained with pain from a bandaged shoulder. He took a step forward, his hands raised, palms out. "Don't," she snarled, the gun not wavering an inch. The sound was feral, unlike anything that had ever come from her. "Don't you sweetheart me, not after this. Not after what I found." Her gaze swept over them. David, the rock. Mark, the joker with kind eyes, now shadowed with grief. James, the young prospect who'd taught her to change a tire just last week. And Paul, the club president, her dad, the man who'd held her when she had nightmares, who'd danced with her at her high school graduation. His face was a mask of ash and dried blood, his leather cut, the one that read, "President," torn and stained. She focused on him. "They're saying it was havoc, that the Reapers did this because we're moving in on their territory, but that's not all, is it, Paul? That's not why I was spared." Paul's jaw tightened. "Maya, whatever you think you know." "I know I was a bargaining chip," she screamed, the emotion finally breaking through, making the gun tremble for a second before she tightened her grip. "I found it, in the wreckage of your office, Mom's letter. My real mom's letter, the one you told me was lost." A collective, sharp intake of breath. The air in the room shifted, the camaraderie and shared grief suddenly laced with a thick, ugly secret. "It was a truce, wasn't it?" Maya's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. 17 years ago, a baby girl handed over to the enemy to stop a war. I wasn't adopted out of kindness. I was a payment. So you tell me right now, who is my father? Is it him? Is John Havoc Gallo my blood? Did my real father just order the murder of my mother? Of my brothers? The silence that followed was heavier than the gun in her hand. It was the sound of a foundation, of a family, cracking apart. Paul looked old, older than Maya had ever seen him. The formidable leader of the Steel Jokers was gone, replaced by a weary, wounded man staring down the barrel of his greatest failure. He let out a long, shuddering breath, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "It's not that simple, Maya," he began, his voice rough with unshed tears. "Put the gun down, please. Let me tell you about Elena." The story didn't start with a gun. It started with a woman named Elena, with hair like midnight and a laugh that could make the surliest joker crack a smile. Paul told it like he was reliving a dream, his eyes fixed on a point in the past, far away from the ruin of the present. "She was light," he said, his voice softening. "Came into this life by accident, waitressing at a bar we used to frequent. She wasn't part of this world. She was art and poetry and everything clean we'd left behind." And Havoc? John Gallo? He saw it too. The Reapers and the Jokers had been at a stalemate, a bloody, grinding conflict over trucking routes that was costing both clubs men and money. The only thing fiercer than the war was the competition between their two presidents for Elena's heart. "She chose him," Paul said, And even after all these years, the old wound was there, a faint flicker of pain in his eyes. Said his violence was a fire she could control. Mine, she said, was an ice she couldn't melt. It near broke me, but I loved her enough to let her go. Or I was stupid enough to try. The truce was Elena's idea. A fragile peace, brokered for her. For a while, it held. Then, she got pregnant. Havoc was ecstatic, said it was a new beginning for all of us. But the world doesn't work like that, Maya. Old hatreds run deep. Paul's gaze returned to her, sharp and pained. There was an ambush, a deal gone wrong. 2 jokers dead. We knew it was the Reapers. Havoc swore it wasn't him, that it was a rogue member. I didn't believe him. I declared war. The night the war was to reignite, Elena had shown up at the Joker's clubhouse, 8 months pregnant, desperate and terrified. She begged me, Maya, on her knees. She said the violence would never end, that her child, you, would be born into a war zone and would die in one. She proposed a new truce, a permanent one. Mark, who had been silently cleaning a rifle, flinched. David looked at the floor. They all knew what was coming. She said she would give the baby to the club that survived, a token of peace, a guarantee that the winning side would have a piece of her, a piece of Havoc, to raise and protect, ensuring the other side would never rise again. It was madness. But she was so scared, and we were all so tired of the blood. She bet me? Maya whispered, the gun lowering slightly, her face a canvas of horrified disbelief. My mother bet my life on which one of you would win your stupid war? No, Paul said fiercely. She bet on which one of us would stop the war. She went to Havoc with the same offer. He was furious, called it a betrayal. He threw her out, told her the child was as good as dead to him. Elena, alone and heartbroken, had come back to Paul. She'd had the baby, a beautiful, dark-haired girl. And then, a week later, she was gone. A single gunshot in a motel room. The official report was a robbery. No one in either club believed it. She left a letter, Paul said, his voice breaking. For you. And one for me. She made me swear on her memory to raise you as my own, to love you, to protect you from the truth, and from him. The war ended that day, Maya. Because of you. We called a ceasefire. We buried our dead, including Elena, and we raised you. You were the peace treaty. You are the peace treaty. The gun was now pointing at the floor. Maya's whole body was shaking, tears streaming down her face freely. And the man who killed her? The man whose blood I share? Did he do this tonight? Before Paul could answer, the roar of motorcycles echoed outside, growing rapidly closer. Too many of them. James, who was watching from a window, cursed. Reapers! A whole damn convoy, they've surrounded us. Panic flashed through the room. Wounded men reached for weapons, their faces set in grim masks. Paul's eyes met Maya's. The anger was gone from her face, replaced by a terrifying, cold clarity. She looked at the gun in her hand, then back at him. It seems, she said, her voice eerily calm, like my father's come to collect. The steel jokers, what was left of them, moved with a practiced, desperate efficiency. Barricades were reinforced at the shattered windows and the blown-out main door. Ammunition was distributed, the metallic clicks of rounds being chambered a grim chorus. Maya stood frozen in the center of the chaos, the letter clutched in one hand, the gun in the other. The abstract monster of Havoc was now a tangible threat, rumbling outside these very walls. Paul limped over to her, his movements stiff. He didn't try to take the gun. Instead, he placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. Maya, listen to me. Whatever happens out there, you remember what I told you. You are my daughter, in every way that matters. You are a joker. This club, these men, they are your family. We protect our own. He's my blood, she whispered, her eyes wide with a turmoil of fear, hatred, and a horrifying, morbid curiosity. Blood is just noise, David grunted, hefting a shotgun. Family is what you choose, and we chose you, kid, Every damn day. A voice, amplified by a bullhorn, cut through the tension from outside. It was deep, authoritative, and laced with a cold amusement that made Maya's skin crawl. "Paul, I know you're in there. You've got something of mine. I've come to take her back." All eyes turned to Maya. The 45 felt like a lead weight. She was the something, the bargaining chip, the heirloom, the cause of all of this. Paul's face hardened into the mask of the club president. He strode to the barricaded door, his voice projecting with a force that belied his injuries. "You have a funny way of showing familial concern, Gallo, sending men to burn my house down and kill my people. You think that makes me want to hand her over?" A low chuckle came through the horn. "I didn't order that hit, you sentimental fool. If I had, you'd all be dead, and I'd have my daughter already. That was the work of the Vipers. They've been playing us against each other for months, picking at the edges of our territories, waiting for us to weaken each other. They hit you tonight, and they'll be coming for me next. They know the only thing that's kept them at bay all these years is the fear of the Jokers and Reapers united." The revelation landed like a bomb in the silent clubhouse. The Vipers. A new, ruthless gang that had been slowly encroaching. It made a terrible, tactical sense. "He's lying," Mark spat. "It's a trick." "Is it?" Havoc's voice was closer now. He was off his bike, walking toward the clubhouse. "Check your dead, Paul. Were they killed with 45s, our preferred tool, or with 9mm of cheap, efficient, Viper work?" James, pale, nodded from his post. "He's right. I checked. It was all 9mm shell casings out there." A new kind of tension filled the room. The enemy wasn't at the gate. The enemy was a phantom they'd missed, and the man at the gate was a potential, albeit treacherous, ally. "The world has changed. Paul!" Havoc called out, his voice now stripped of its amusement, leaving only a hard, pragmatic edge. "The old rules don't apply. This new war won't end with a truce, baby. It will end with the complete annihilation of one side, and right now, that side is looking like it's going to be ours. Both of ours. Let me see my daughter. Let me talk to her." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Paul. Her dad, wounded but resolute, surrounded by his loyal, battered men. Then she looked toward the door, toward the voice of the myth, the monster, the man who was her biological father. She made a decision. Before Paul could stop her, she walked to the main barricade and pushed a heavy cabinet aside, just enough to slip through the shattered doorway, stepping out into the harsh glare of motorcycle headlights. She stood on the top step of the clubhouse, silhouetted against the dim light from inside. The 45 was held tight at her side, not raised, but ready. Before her, lined up like a dark army, were the Reapers. Dozens of them. And in front of them all, standing with his arms crossed, was John Havoc Gallo. He was taller than she'd imagined. His hair was shot with silver, but he had the same powerful build as Paul, the same lived-in face, etched with a history of violence. But his eyes were different. Paul's were a steady, weary blue. Havoc's were a piercing, calculating green. And right now, those green eyes were locked on her, widening with an emotion she couldn't decipher. Shock? Recognition? Avarice? "Well, I'll be damned," Havoc breathed, the bullhorn hanging limply at his side. "Elena." He took a step forward. And a dozen Joker weapons cocked behind Maya. A dozen Reaper weapons rose in response. The air crackled with the imminent threat of a massacre. "Stay where you are," Maya said. Her voice didn't shake. It was cold, flat. The voice of a girl who had lost everything in one night and had nothing left to lose. Havoc stopped, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. It didn't reach his eyes. "Look at you, all that fire. You have her eyes, but you have my temper, I see." "Did you kill my mother?" Maya asked, point blank. The smile vanished. "No." The answer was immediate, blunt, and carried a surprising weight of conviction. "I loved your mother. Her death was an inconvenience, one I paid for in blood years ago. The man who pulled the trigger was a Viper pawn, even then. I ripped his heart out with my bare hands. He said it with such casual brutality that Maya believed him. The truth was a physical blow. Her entire life, the foundational story of her existence, was a lie built on a misunderstanding. "You let Paul believe you did it," she accused. Havoc shrugged, a fluid, predatory movement. "It served a purpose. It kept him hating me, which kept him away from you. It maintained the balance. And it meant I never had to look at the living, breathing reminder of the woman who chose to give my child to my enemy." His gaze swept over her, from her worn boots to her tear-streaked face. "But look at you now, standing between them and me, the perfect, living truce. It seems your mother was right all along." He took another step, ignoring the tension from the jokers. "The Vipers are coming, girl. They'll be here within the hour. They've broken us apart, and now they're coming to pick up the pieces. Paul and his boys are dead men walking. You can stay here and die with them, a joker in name only, for a cause that's already lost. Or," he extended a hand, his voice dropping, becoming almost intimate, a father coaxing his child. "Or you can come with me, your real family, your blood. Help me finish what the Vipers started. Help me burn them all to the ground. Take your rightful place by my side, as my daughter, as a reaper." The offer hung in the air, seductive and terrifying. It was a promise of power, of vengeance, of belonging to the man whose very blood sang in her veins. She could feel Paul's desperate gaze on her back, the hope and fear of the men behind her. She was the pivot point. The daughter of two kings, standing in the ruins of one kingdom, being offered the keys to another. She looked at Havoc's outstretched hand, then back at the dark, wounded shell of the clubhouse that had been her home. Love or power? The family who raised her or the blood that defined her? Maya made her choice. She didn't take his hand. Instead, she raised the .45 again, but this time she didn't point it at the jokers, or at Havoc. She turned slightly, pointing it at the space between the two factions, at the unseen enemy approaching in the night. "My name is Maya," she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying over the idling engines. "Elena was my mother, and the man who killed her and the men who killed my family tonight are out there, so you can stand here and posture about blood and legacy. Or," she looked directly at Havoc, her green eyes, so like his, blazing with a cold fire. "Or you can get your asses inside and we can plan how we're going to send every last one of those Viper bastards to hell." A stunned silence fell. Then a low, genuine laugh rumbled from Havoc's chest. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated admiration. "Paul," Havoc called out, not taking his eyes off Maya. "You raised a queen." From the doorway, Paul stepped out, standing beside Maya. He looked at Havoc, a lifetime of hatred in his gaze, but a new, grim respect there too. He looked at Maya, his daughter, and gave a single, proud nod. "All right, Gallo," Paul said, his voice gravelly with exhaustion and something like hope. "You heard my daughter. Get inside. We've got a war to win." The inside of the clubhouse was a tense, surreal tableau. Jokers and reapers, lifelong enemies, stood on opposite sides of the main room, the air thick with suspicion and the lingering scent of blood. The only neutral ground was the large, scarred pool table in the center, where Paul and Havoc stood on one side, and Maya stood between them. Maps were spread out, hand-drawn schematics of the city's underworld. The story was pieced together quickly, efficiently. The Vipers had been clever, using small, deniable attacks to provoke both clubs, always making it look like the work of the other. They had whittled down numbers, stoked the old hatreds, and waited for the perfect moment to strike a decisive blow. "They hit us tonight because we were vulnerable," Paul stated, jabbing a finger at the map. "We're moving the new shipment through the docks tomorrow. They knew that. They take us out, they intercept the shipment, and with the profit they can fund a full-scale assault on your territory, Gallo." Havoc nodded, his mind working with a cold, tactical precision that was unsettling to watch. "They'll be expecting us to be at each other's throats. They won't be expecting a unified front." As the two older men fell into a grim, strategic discussion, Maya found herself momentarily on the periphery. The initial adrenaline was fading, leaving a hollow, aching exhaustion in its wake. She felt a presence beside her and turned to see a young man leaning against the wall. He was around her age, maybe a year or two older, with dark, intense eyes and the lean, muscular build of a fighter. He wore a reaper cut, but he lacked the grizzled hardness of the older members. There was a quiet intelligence in his gaze as he watched her. "Luca," he said by way of introduction, his voice a low murmur. "Havoc's, well, I'm his lieutenant." Maya just nodded, too drained for conversation. "That was some speech out there," Luca continued, his eyes lingering on her face. "Pointing a gun at two of the most dangerous men in the city and giving them orders. I've never seen anyone do that and live to tell about it." "There's a first time for everything," Maya replied, her tone flat. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It was the sexiest thing I've ever seen." The comment was so unexpected, so entirely out of place in the grim surroundings, that a startled, half-hysterical laugh escaped Maya's lips. She looked at him properly then. He was handsome, in a dangerous, off-kilter way. And the way he was looking at her wasn't with pity or fear, but with a raw, undisguised fascination. "You're insane," she said, shaking her head. "Comes with the cut," he shrugged. He pushed off the wall and took a step closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "I remember when you were just a story, the Joker princess. Havoc would get drunk and talk about the daughter he lost. He had a picture, you know, a grainy one, of you as a little girl on a motorcycle. He kept it. We all wondered what you'd be like." "And?" Maya asked, intrigued despite herself, drawn into the intimacy of the moment. "Do I live up to the legend?" Luca's gaze was intense, sweeping over her face, lingering on her mouth. "You shattered it. The legend was a ghost. You're a storm." The chemistry between them was a live wire, a sudden, shocking heat in the cold aftermath of death. It was reckless and foolish and exactly the kind of raw, life-affirming impulse she needed. For a moment, the weight of the world, the dead, the fathers, the impending war, fell away, and it was just the two of them, two young people standing in the eye of a hurricane. The moment was broken by Havoc's voice. "Luca, stop trying to seduce my doll." Luca gave her a final, smoldering look before turning and joining the War Council. Maya's cheeks felt warm, her heart beating for a reason other than fear for the first time that night. It was a dangerous distraction, but it made her feel alive. The plan that was formed was audacious, a masterpiece of misdirection and brutal force. The Jokers, or what was left of them, would be the bait. They would make a show of moving the shipment, appearing weakened and desperate. The Reapers would lie in wait, hidden along the route. When the Vipers took the bait, they would be caught in a pincer movement and crushed. "There's one problem," James, the young prospect, spoke up, his voice nervous. "They'll be expecting a certain number of us. After the attack, we don't have the men to make it look convincing." All eyes turned to Maya. "They won't be counting a woman," Havoc said, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his face. "They think you're just a story, a ghost. They won't be expecting my daughter on the back of a Joker's bike." Paul immediately shook his head. "No, absolutely not. I won't use her as a pawn again. Not in this." "She's not a pawn, Paul," Havoc countered, his voice hard. "She's a weapon, one they don't know exists, and it's her choice." Maya looked from one father to the other. Paul, who wanted to protect her. Havoc, who wanted to unleash her. She thought of her mother, Elena, who had tried to create peace with her life. She thought of the charred bodies of the men who had taught her to ride, to fight, to live. She thought of Luca's intense, admiring gaze. She straightened her shoulders, the weight of the .45 a comforting, familiar presence at her hip. "Tell me what I have to do," she said. The docks at night were a world of shadows and echoes, the air thick with the smell of salt, rust, and decay. A small convoy of 3 trucks, emblazoned with the Joker's logo, rumbled along the wet asphalt, their headlights cutting lonely paths through the fog. They moved slowly, deliberately, like a wounded animal trying to appear strong. Maya was on the back of David's bike, her arms wrapped around his waist. She wore a black leather jacket over a simple tank top, her face pale but set in a mask of grim determination. She could feel the tension in David's back, the way his body was coiled like a spring. In the side mirror of the bike, she could see the other Jokers, Paul, Mark, James, their faces hard and ready. They were the sheep, walking willingly into the wolf's den. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Every shadow seemed to move. Every drip of water sounded like a footstep. She clutched the handle of the .45 tucked into her waistband. This was it. The moment of truth. They reached the designated loading bay, a cavernous, dimly lit space between two massive warehouses. The trucks rolled to a stop, their engines cutting out one by one. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant cry of a foghorn and the lapping of water against the piers. For a long minute, nothing happened. Then, from the shadows, they emerged. Silently. Fluidly. Dozens of them, men clad in dark, nondescript clothing, their faces hard, their movements efficient. They carried 9mm pistols and compact submachine guns. Vipers. They fanned out, surrounding the Joker's convoy with practiced ease. A man stepped forward, taller than the others, with a lean, reptilian face and a cruel twist to his mouth. Maya recognized him from the descriptions, Silas, the Viper's leader. "Paul," Silas called out, his voice slick and mocking. "You look like hell. I heard you had a little trouble at the clubhouse. A shame." Paul stepped down from the lead truck, his hands held away from his body. "What do you want?" Silas. "What do I want?" Silas laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "I want what's mine. This shipment, this territory, this city. I'm tired of living in the shadow of two old dinosaurs who are too busy fighting each other to see the world changing." His eyes scanned the Jokers, a predator assessing his prey. "You're all that's left?" "Pathetic. I expected more of a fight." His gaze then fell on Maya, still seated on the back of David's bike. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "And what's this? A little parting gift? Didn't know you Jokers were in the business of trafficking now." David tensed beneath her, a low growl forming in his throat. Maya placed a calming hand on his back, her own fear crystallizing into a cold, sharp point of hatred. "She's with me," Paul said, his voice dangerously low. "Is she now?" Silas took a step closer, his eyes raking over Maya with vulgar interest. "Pretty thing. She'll fetch a good price once we're done here." That was the signal. As Silas took another step, his attention fully on Maya, Paul gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. Maya moved. In one fluid motion, she swung her leg off the bike, drew the .45, and fired a single deafening shot into the air. The report echoed like a thunderclap in the confined space. For a split second, the Vipers froze, confused. They had been expecting a cowed, defeated remnant of a club. They were not expecting this. And then hell broke loose, from the rooftops of the surrounding warehouses, from behind stacks of shipping containers. The Reapers opened fire. Muzzle flashes lit up the night like strobes. The sound was overwhelming, the staccato roar of automatic weapons, the shouts of men, the screams of the wounded. The Vipers, caught completely by surprise, scrambled for cover. Their perfect ambush had become a perfect trap. Maya didn't hesitate. She dropped into a crouch behind the motorcycle, using it as a shield. David was already firing his shotgun, the boom a comforting, familiar sound. She saw James, his face a mask of fierce concentration, trading shots with two Vipers behind a forklift. She saw Mark take a bullet in the leg and go down, only to keep firing from the ground. This was no longer a strategic exercise. It was chaos. It was survival. She saw Silas, his reptilian face contorted in rage, barking orders, trying to rally his men. He was the key. Cut off the head. Maya started moving, using the chaos as her cover. She weaved between the trucks, staying low, her eyes locked on Silas. Bullets whizzed past her, pinging off the metal around her. She didn't flinch. The world had narrowed to her target, and the gun in her hand. She was almost there when a massive viper lunged from behind a crate, his arms wrapping around her in a bear hug, lifting her off the ground. The .45 clattered to the concrete. She struggled, kicking and elbowing, but he was too strong. His breath was hot and foul in her ear. "Gotcha, you little bitch," he grunted. Suddenly the man stiffened, his grip loosening. A look of profound surprise crossed his face before he crumpled to the ground, revealing Luca standing behind him, a bloody knife in his hand. "I told you," Luca said, his eyes wild with the thrill of the fight, a smirk on his lips. "Sexiest thing I've ever seen." He kicked the .45 back toward her. Maya scooped it up, her eyes meeting his for a charged, electric moment. There was no time for words. A nod of thanks, a shared, fierce look, and they turned back to the fight, fighting side by side. She pushed forward, finally getting a clear line of sight on Silas. He saw her coming, his eyes widening in recognition and fury. He raised his own pistol, but he was too slow. Maya didn't aim for his chest. She aimed for his hand. She fired once. The bullet struck his wrist, and his pistol flew from his grasp with a cry of pain. She closed the distance in a few quick strides, kicking the gun away and leveling the .45 at his forehead. The firefight around them was dying down. The Vipers, leaderless and outmaneuvered, were being subdued. The Reapers and Jokers moved through the carnage, a united, vengeful force. Silas knelt before her, clutching his bleeding wrist, his face a mask of hatred and pain. You're the girl, Havoc's bastard." "My name is Maya," she said, her voice cold and steady, the barrel of the gun not wavering an inch from his face. "Elena was my mother." Understanding, and then terror dawned in Silas's eyes. He knew what that name meant. He knew the depth of the mistake he had made. From the side, Paul and Havoc approached, their weapons lowered. They stopped a few feet away, letting her have this moment. "Did you kill her?" Maya asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Did you give the order for my mother?" Silas, defeated and knowing he was a dead man, spat on the ground near her feet. She was a loose end. A sentimental fool who thought she could stop a war with a baby. This life doesn't work like that. That was all the confession she needed. The world seemed to slow down. She saw Paul's grim nod. She saw Havoc's cold, approving stare. She saw Luca watching her, his expression unreadable. She felt the weight of the gun, the weight of her history, the weight of the future. She thought of the little girl who had been a peace treaty. She thought of the woman she was now, standing over her mother's killer. She made her choice. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot was clean, precise, and final. It echoed once, then was swallowed by the lapping water and the moans of the dying. Silas's body slumped to the ground, a dark stain spreading beneath his head. Maya lowered the gun, her hand perfectly steady. There was no triumph in her, no euphoria, only a vast, hollow quiet. A debt had been paid. A circle had been closed. She turned and walked away from the body, toward the two men who were her fathers. Paul looked at her with a profound, heart-breaking sadness and pride. Havoc looked at her with a fierce, possessive triumph. "It's done," Maya said, her voice empty. The cleanup began. The surviving Vipers were disarmed and rounded up. The dead were counted. The Jokers had lost Mark. He had bled out from his leg wound. The cost had been high, but the threat was eliminated. As the sun began to tinge the horizon with a bloody red, the two clubs stood together in the loading bay, the line between Joker and Reaper blurred, but not erased. The alliance had been one of necessity, and with the common enemy gone, the old tensions began to resurface. Havoc walked over to Paul, his demeanor all business once more. The city is ours now, to share or to fight over. Again. Paul's gaze was steady. We'll talk, but not today. Havoc then turned to Maya. You belong with me now. You've earned your place. Come back to the clubhouse, your real home. Maya looked at him, this formidable, brutal man who was her blood. She saw the power he offered, the legacy. Then she looked at Paul, the weary, loving man who had given her a childhood, a home, a family. She looked at David, at James, at the memory of Mark. She thought of Luca, who was watching the exchange intently. I have a home, she said quietly to Havoc. A flicker of anger crossed his face, but it was quickly masked by a grudging respect. So be it. But know this, Maya Gallo. The door is always open. You are my blood, and this city will know it. With a final, unreadable look, he turned and barked an order to his men. The reapers mounted their bikes, the thunderous roar of their engines shattering the dawn's silence. They pulled out of the loading bay, a dark river of leather and steel, and disappeared into the waking city. Luca was the last to leave. He walked over to her, his intense eyes searching hers. This isn't goodbye, Storm, he said, his voice a low promise. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, a touch that sent a shiver through her entire body. It was a touch that spoke of a future that was uncertain, dangerous, and undeniably compelling. Then he was gone, swinging his leg over his bike and following his president. Silence descended, broken only by the idling of the Joker's trucks. Maya stood alone for a moment, the events of the last 24 hours crashing down on her. The grief, the betrayal, the violence, the impossible choices. She felt a sob building in her chest. Then, a strong arm wrapped around her shoulders. It was Paul. He pulled her into a tight, wordless hug. She buried her face in his leather cut, the familiar smell of oil and old spice and home filling her senses, and finally, she let the tears come. She had pointed a gun and demanded to know who her father was. She had found two, and in the process, she had found herself. She was Maya, daughter of Elena, raised by Paul, blood of Havoc. She was a Joker, she was a Reaper, she was the peace treaty and the war, and her story was only just beginning. Thank you for watching. Her entire life was a lie, built on a secret that shattered 2 mafia dynasties. Can a truce born from blood ever lead to real peace? If you were moved by Maya's impossible choice, subscribe now and tell us where you're watching from in the comments.